Okay. All right. Hello. Thank you guys for all joining us tonight. We have a virtual lifelong learners community presentation, which is going to be brought to you by the Ho-Chunk Nation Indigenous Arts and Sciences. This program was created to bring educators and students opportunities related to our culture and related to environmental science. Tonight we have two speakers. We have our Ho-Chunk Nation president-elect that'll be coming into office in July, John Greendeer, and our Tribal Historic Preservation Officer, Bill Quackenbush. So they'll be presenting on Ho-Chunk history, past, present, and future. We'll also have a little time at the end for a discussion. So if you think of any questions, please feel free to put them in the chats and we will be touching on some of those at the end. Also, we will be sharing a couple of events in the comments or the chat as well that we have coming up. So I will turn it over to John and Bill to get started here. Thank you.
Oh, hey, we'll go kanina Hichokoro niwe na anachi ni karagiwi. Okay, Hoji Shano, Hichokoro hara warehi karashiri da wa unje.
Move back in there if you want.
Jeske Jagu hi hechinawira Anachakchi Hiragi Yanagagi, why no pat umekshane. Eske Hokjana na Jagi waja kategi nigitayanaga, Jeske Jagu Nigishana Jigi Yaun Chakchinawi. Eske Ho-Chunk Woshka Anaga Ho-Chunk Nagara China Nagara De Honigida Dixne Eske Higuanachti Egijigegi Wine Up Wahaje. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Did you understand all of that? Because I didn't. I'm just reading it from a script over here. So I want to say thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. I'm going to kind of switch up cameras here. And tonight we're in for a great session. We're here to share a little bit of what our experiences have given to us as well. We're also here to learn a little bit from each of you. Every time you ask a question, it actually helps us formulate how we're going to be sharing a little bit more. My name is John Greendeer. Mashusta is what they call me. It translates to white feather. And I currently work as the Health and Wellness Coordinator for the Ho-Chunk Nation Department of Health. And then, sorry, my camera's over here. And then I have been asked to serve and lead our nation. So on July 5th, I will be swearing in once again as the president of the Ho-Chunk Nation. Thank you to our Ho-Chunk families and friends out there who entrusted me with such a wonderful job. I'm looking forward to it. But more importantly, it's the stuff like this that I don't want to miss, and I'm sure hoping that at some point when things slow down, I get to hang out more with my little nephew here, Bill. So I'm going to turn it over for his introductions at this point.
Oh, good evening. Ho-Chunk Rajara, now Chuck PJ Hingaire. Basically, my name is not Stalin in our traditional language. I often tell people there when I speak to the public that my name is Bill Quackenbush. That's my tax-paying name that I see on our tax stubs every year.
But he's still delinquent, so I don't know why he said that.
Yeah, I just like to bring it up and rub it in there a little bit. But yeah, in short, I've worked for the Ho-Chunk Nation for 20-some years. As most people know me, I've worked in the Heritage Preservation Department ever since I was hired back in 1998. I've moved around a little bit within our department. I initially started for the first 5 years working in our environmental end as a land specialist there. And in hindsight, looking at that, one of the benefits that I still hold near and dear to my heart was that I was in close and constant contact with our tribal lands, both our trust lands as well as fee simple as the nation acquires it. I worked at that time it was called District 4. And in District 4, we did a lot of the land fee to trust packages back then. Back in the year 2000, it seemed like they had created what they had formerly referred to as the Ho-Chunk Dream Team or Ho-Chunk Team. It was a combination of all the different departments there where we put our minds together there and worked on placing land in trust, concentration of land. At that time, I think we picked 2 different properties in each of the districts at that time. They were really focused on getting that ball rolling and placing land in the trust, which I think in hindsight, it was something that we had determined we needed to do. At that time, we also were working on the big old Taj Mahal Ho-Chunk Nation land use plan that was recognized in the year 2000. And I came into working for the nation at that time in a really upswing, an uptick for the nation, and the change of administrations were taking place, of course, there. But we really wanted to assure that we were connected to our tribal lands at that time. And heritage preservation in the 90s was a fledgling department like all the rest of the departments. And in hindsight, looking back at it, we've really changed. But at the period of time, it doesn't seem like you're involved in that change. And yet constantly you're making history within our own tribal government, but also where we focused our energies. Everybody likes to think of the tribe, right, as this bottomless pit of money out there. And in reality, that just isn't the case, that we're limited in resources all across the spectrum. Not funding, we're limited of resources for staff, time. So we had to find ways of making it work. And every year we like to think that we become more efficient, what we do. But with the pandemic that came upon us here several 3 years ago, we really began to realize just how limited we were as a tribal government and how dependent we really were still on our surrounding and social and economic process out there. So we taught ourselves, retaught ourselves how to think, and I think we made it through the pandemic. We're here, and so I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about our history, about the past and how we rely on that so much, and today the present, and how our future is so dependent on what we're doing today, making that history. So in short, my name is Bill Quackenbush, right? And I serve the nation as a tribal historic preservation officer. And I think that's the end of the meeting. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. There's prizes. No.
Yeah, but I just need to lay kind of the basis down of kind of where we're coming from today too. And I remember, even though John is my Dega and he called me his little Chunske here, I think I can almost picture him running around in diapers.
You should. Just so folks know, the underlying kinship relationship that we have in our Ho-Chunk way. Just give a quick synopsis. Your mother's sisters are all your moms, so all of their kids are your siblings. Your father's brothers are all your fathers, so you have all those siblings from that side. Things get a little crazy though, because your mother's brothers are your Degas, and any male offspring they have down the line are your little Degas, and you're always going to have. So I'm his little uncle, and we share a relationship with your Dega and your Chunske that is a teasing relationship. But you're also the disciplinarian, and you're also their best friend. You're also the one that's going to take them out and give them what they want. If they ask for something, it's theirs. So the teasing is always going to be a part of our Dega nephew relationship. No one gets it worse than the son-in-law or the brother-in-law. I'm sorry, the brother-in-law usually is the one out chopping wood for the family and gathering all the horses up and doing all the work. So you might hear that a little bit, and I was just thinking about that when Bill was talking about all the places that he worked. I know all the supervisors, none of them said he worked, but he was on the payroll. So you got that. So we have an amazing opportunity tonight to walk through a little bit of the history. We don't get a lot of opportunities to deviate from the norm that the academia tells you is your history, right? And just to let you know, I'm absolutely unapologetic. So when a bunch of non-tribal archaeologists and professors tell me how we used to live, I never accept that. They're not going to learn a lot looking through the garbage and the refuse of civilizations past. And we're not talking about things that are 100, 200 years old. We're going to be actually taking you back to the last Ice Age period and how civilizations formed and how we developed roles that we kind of look as more symbolic today, but we're actually very functional in our survival and our thriving back in the old days, thousands of years ago when I was just a young boy. So, but Bill had taken the time. I think he dug through his old freshman high school files of his presentation, and he has a little couple stick drawings that he put together, black and white, back before there was color. And I think he's going to give us a nice little rounded synopsis. Type those questions in the chat box, because if you're like me, those questions come and go like a fart in the wind, and you just want to get them asked so that we can get those together and try to give you an answer. Bill's knowledgeable. He probably knows the answer before you ask it. I'm a politician. I'll make up an answer by the time you're done. So I have no problem doing either or. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my nephew here. He's got a wonderful presentation. We're going to share the screen here. And again, if you have any questions that you wanted to ask, now is the time, and maybe we can sneak one in. So let's do this.
All right.
Is that the first one?
Oh, that's it.
Let me.
I'm going on back. There. Modern technology. So as John mentioned, we talked about this presentation here throughout the months, actually. But then also we realized how fast the spring goes for us. And at our 11th hour here, we talked in short that what I was going to do is take some of our presentations that we customarily use in historic preservation or heritage preservation through cultural resource here, and put some together there, and then add some additional information on the end to make it pertinent to this evening's discussion. So in short, what you'll see is a lot of slides that are quite dated. If you see dated numbers or dates, that's because I gleaned them from presentations in the past that we took off slides. You can't probably see them in the background, but we have shelving here in Cultural Resource Division that has numerous round cylindrical slides that presenters from our Cultural Resource Division was giving 20 some years ago. But it's interesting to take those slides and put them to the electronic era here and utilize some of them. But when John alluded to the fact that we're going to talk about our history, the Ho-Chunk people, our culture, that takes us back to the last glacier episode. I should maybe get to one of them. A lot of people have a hard time comprehending that in the placement of time. As John says, archaeologists and anthropologists and whateverologists there are that wants to tell us about our history, third party, it sometimes come in one ear and out the other. And although we will, hear it, we don't necessarily listen to that process. And what's important to us is that our oral history, that we talk about day in, day out, whether it's in, formal settings of this nature, or if it's in passing within our tribal communities, or to our youth, or to, even to the outside, groups of people out there, it's important for us to make sure that it's accurate. And one of the things that our division is directed to do is to ensure that we supply accurate information, if it's requested. So you'll hear the likes of the names of, a lot of our traditional course members that are present today yet, and some that have passed, that we have vetted a lot of our PowerPoint presentations through. And our executive directors, they were picked from individuals out there that were leaders, in their own right, that have the ability to step right into the position of roles and begin allowing us to, or direct us, as they saw fit. So this first slide here, it talks about the Ho-Chunk origin stories and how they refer to a place called Noble Chutes. And when you hear our terminology that we have a difficult time putting it into the English writing, we try to make it sound, for lack of a better term, hooked on phonics, right? We try to write it out the best way we can, in order for it to be said properly. And so if you hear these terms like Mogasuch, Deishi Chick, right, and Nichade, the Mississippi River, big round rock, right, and stuff like that. Those names are very descriptive, and what's enjoyable in most native cultures and languages is that when they use that terminology, Mogasuch, and if you're knowledgeable of the language, it puts you, if you close your eyes, you can place you right in that spot instantaneously. Nichade, right? The big river, the big waters, and so it puts you in a place ancestrally, and it takes you all the way back to when those words were first created by our ancestors. And that first bullet or two there talks about red banks. That's the English rendition of what Mogasuch means in Ho-Chunk, and all that. Today we often refer to that area as the Green Bay area. And you'll hear a lot about Mogasuch and how it's near and dear to our hearts, and that's, they say, where it is, where our first fires were lit. Years ago, one of my Degas spoke to us at an all-staff meeting, and he told us several stories, and it still is vivid in my mind, of how he just was, just would almost close his eyes and talk about our history, and you can see him doing that. And I presented to a group here several weeks ago, and I mentioned how before you know it, a lot of these elders that you just took for granted, they're no longer here. And even I, growing up, I gather a tenth of the information that they tried to beat into your head, and I think they hope that that we can learn it all, but in reality we only learn a tenth of the knowledge they try to pass on. And I find that day in and day out that becomes a critical component in our department, for example, within the nation, is that inherited preservation. We try to retain information accurately to disperse among our tribal members and whoever wishes to hear that. But in reality, they only gain a tenth of that information, going through life. But when we talk about our history, it places us in our origin stories talks about a place called Mogasuch. They say that at one time in our ancestral footprint, which is on this map I'm going to bring up a little larger here, and they said that there's at one time you could travel anywhere with our ancestral footprint, and you'd run into no other people than the Ho-Chunk people. And yet through the years, we were, affected by environmental change. And our grandmother, our mother Earth here, she takes care of us, but she's on a constant change out there. And if we don't change with her, we don't adapt, and we don't assimilate to, what she gives us, we would cease to exist. And we talk about these animals of old that we, still have stories about and history of, about, these animals that were here in the last glacier episode, for example, those mastodon, those short-faced bear, and those large beaver, and so on and so forth. And they no longer are here because the environment has changed to a certain degree where they no longer could live here. And if we would have ceased, if we would have ceased to exist right alongside them, if we didn't have the ability or what our creator gave us, and that's this mind up here and the ability to change, like I say, we would have been extinct right alongside them. Fast forward through time though, and transition that we've took on about how we had to, what Jim Funmaker of old used to refer to as a place of refuge. The last glacier episode that come across our ancestral area here pushed us to the south for a short period of time. He referred to that area as a place of refuge, and oftentimes you'll hear in today's society talk about that area as in tourism, right? They talk about that as the driftless area, and you'll see it to a great degree. That last two glacier episodes didn't touch this area. I think I have another image of it. Here they are. But in short, you don't live atop of glaciers, and our stories of that takes us way back. They talk about us living alongside this sheet of ice, and how we watched, our environment changed and it began to recede to the north. And there's a certain series of stories that talks about, how the big river, came to be what it is today, and how it influenced the Wisconsin River, how the Dells area came to be. And these stories are real beautiful stories. You go to Day Quackenbush, right? Devil's Lake, Mount Quackenbush, and those stories that talks about how, that area had changed to such a high degree. Many of our stories of that area still, you can read between the lines or listen between the lines, and you can hear how our environment had changed, and our ancestors, the only way they could tell those stories was being there at that time to be able to witness that and take it into account, and want to pass this down to their generations and in the future there, to assure that they understand where we came from back then and where they were at, and in hopes that it better assist us in taking care of ourselves in the future. And that's no different than today. That's why we sit here today, and talk to a great degree about our history, connected to this ancestral area right here, because we think it still plays an important role, not only for us, but also for our neighbors and those people that have interest in that. But that glacier episode played a large role in environmental change here. And this image here is what we teach most people in secular society about. The Paleo Indians living alongside the glacier area, harvesting these mastodon. And these images that are, drawn by a third party, looking into our culture and our history. And the imagery they use to teach our children in school today, it does a disservice and to a high degree. And if you look at that image and it's all a little blurry, you see a lot of Jesus-like individuals, if you want to use that term there, and beards and the fair skin there, throwing spears, and harvesting this mastodon with bows and arrows, which didn't even exist, and cooking a pork chop over here on the fire to the right, much like my Dega John would be doing.
Yeah, this is over there.
Yeah, that is. That's the Greendeer family. Right? But in reality, what we have here is, in reality, this is what as the glacier recedes, this is what it leads you. A scarcified, an environment that is very hard for anything to exist initially. And so as our ancestors would, sit alongside these glaciers, and show the patience that it was needed and required to live amongst, this environment as it changed before our eyes here. These are where these stories that we still have and retain and tell to these days, that's where they come from. This environmental change. And you look back, now we talk about it as if it happened in a matter of, seconds or minutes. When in reality, it takes thousands of years for our mother, the earth, to rebound, like the sponge that she really is. And that glacier episode, when it goes to the north, the earth changes, it's a constant change of that, but our lives are short, and so we don't see it change, but we still are affected by it. And so we talked earlier about pulling out this infamous rope that we tend to use on occasion to show the timeline of history just since the last glacier episode, which, archaeologists or anthropologists, they'll talk about this 10 to 12,000 year period of time since that last glacier ice went to the north. So you have a rope there in this image here, and I'll run them also at the top of this individual. If you took this 50-foot rope and extended out and to show the last glacier episode, that would be 12,000 years. If every inch on there was 20 years. Do the math. I sat there with a tape for days trying to figure it out, but yeah, all right. So I should have just told me
I should have had me corrected. That might be wrong, by the way. That's his math.
Yeah. So in short, this rope. This was a green school, I think, or I don't know. It was a school in Viroqua. The students are phenomenal there. They go through a series of kids, through the years here. So I could almost go back every year and see new faces. But he's pulling the rope. This gentleman right here, and he's at the year. I think that year was year 2020, and so this rope every 20 years, every thumb size measurement on there was 20 years. She would be holding the rope at 1634, and her hand is sitting there in 1492. And then so this lady right here, she's holding a rope that's on the date of 1, and the rope continues on all around the corner and down the hallway there for 50 feet. And so So you can imagine every 20, inches on here, this is about from your armpit to your fingertip. This period of time between here, about 1300, all the way down before 1 AD or 1 BCE, just past that right there, that rope, that's a little over a couple arms length on there. But the rope goes 50 feet. And we have these oral stories I was referring to that take us all the way back to that last glacier episode and beyond. And I'll use a case in point in a few minutes here. But this rope is a really good illustration because it gives you a material way of seeing our history indigenously to this area since the last glacier episode. And when I mentioned 1492, that they say on her hand here, her left hand here, and she had big paws. I didn't realize that. Look at
It's
that.
kind of Marvin
Defoe's birthday right here.
Fucking toilet paper rolls.
1492, Marvin Defoe's online here, by the way. 1492, they say Columbus sailed the blue, and from 1492 all the way up to 2020, this is when the historic periods in the Americas began. That's when it began to get documented, at least. And that history is what we teach predominantly in our history books about the discovery of the Americas, and well, by the way, Christopher Columbus, he just happened to know that there was indigenous people on this land, and you often refer to them as savages, right? And fast forward to Wisconsin, and her hand is sitting on 1634, when this is all history that we all should know in Wisconsin, right? That's when Christopher or Gene Calais stepped ashore in Green Bay. And when I mentioned Green Bay, that should automatically cite to you, well, that's Mogashoots. Bill just got to understand Mogashoots is Red Banks, right? Before Green Bay was a city, it was referred to as Mogashoots.
Sacred site. That's why our Packers are so amazing.
That is very true. Yeah. So we could go off on tangents for hours on that one. So anyway, so that just shows you a little bit of the history of Wisconsin. That black piece of tape right there is when we become the beautiful state of Wisconsin in 1848. So you can show the history of timeline on this rope. The many stories that we have that you could take along this rope, it is incredible. That ribbon that's just past the one that's on 1 BCE, that's 300 BCE. Up to about 13 or 1400 AD there. I mentioned that period of time in there is very significant to our ancestral areas because there is physical evidence of our presence here in Wisconsin that you'll find throughout the state and in Illinois and into Minnesota and parts of Iowa still. And that's those earthworks that you hear so much about today. Those conicals and lineal burial mounds, they're nothing more at the state level. They define those earthworks as grave markers, no different than you go to a Christian cemetery, you see a stone out there, those are grave markers. When you see those grave markers at a state level, you understand that there's likely a burial present there, or else that stone wouldn't be there. Those earthworks are there, placed on the ground, those many periods of years on there, it's more likely there's burials there. And so they, at a state level, that's in 2016, we went to court against a group over there that wanted to fight us against that, wanted to fight the state against that. We sat together and we won in a court of law to protect those burial systems then. And this pushed it into the government side where they wanted to amend that law, Wisconsin 5770. And the administrative code of 4440, they want to change it and strip the teeth from the state and take away the ability to protect those grave markers up there. They didn't want to take away the power to protect those graves and in today's societal cemeteries, but they want to take away from those burial systems. Long story short, we fought them there too. Sat on a study committee. Lo and behold, in 2018, the law was amended with 8 beautiful additions to that law that actually enhanced that law to protect and preserve them. John and his whole crew, they remember that January day where they marched around the Capitol there. It was probably 2 degrees below zero at best in the wind out there, just so that we could all become organized to fight this in our state capitol. You hear that infamous saying, "Save the mountains." It's all on a t-shirt, you see it on bumper stickers, you see it all out there. But that cause change, and all tribes throughout the state of Wisconsin sat together and unified alongside, cemetery organizations, interest groups, and groups of people out there that really had a sincere interest of working together to better our lifestyles in Wisconsin. But it protected those mounds on that rope right there that were built there some 2,000 years ago. And so that still plays an important role even to us to this day. And we often say we don't really know the exact information about who built the mounds, or or how they were built, or the reason this and that, because we've become so assimilated, we can't even tell you what last week was all about. That's the way it is this way. But our ancestors who sat in the court of law, the likes of Dennis Funmaker and other traditional court members, they came there to assure that it doesn't matter who built them, it doesn't matter, but they are in our ancestral footprint, and we protect and preserve them to the highest degree as we know how, and that's what we support to this day. But this plays an important portion in our protection and our preservation today, is to assure that we do the same in our tribal trust lands, that we protect and preserve those burials. And this is why we try to sit across the consultation table against state and federal agencies and say, well, we protect burials to this high degree on our tribal lands and our fee simple lands if we can. We ask that you do the same on yours, because at one time this ancestrally was our land, and it's not because of our doings that we no longer have full title to it. It's because of your doings. So now we ask that you protect our ancestral burial things, and that's just one example. And you could go across the whole gamut of all these cultural resource or culturally sensitive sites to do that form of protection. But it's a good example of how we now have to work together today to assure that we all get to a better tone. But that rope that goes back 10 to 12,000 years, a lot of people say, well, that's kind of like and you'll hear these references to our oral history. They call it myths, and the stories are just something that's not very accurate there, that it doesn't hold much credence, and I'll get back to that, because this image here is an archaeologist's way of telling about our human occupancy in the state of Wisconsin all the way back since the last glacier episode. And these are stone tools, or for lack of a better term, these are hunting tools that you see here. So the arrows, points on the rights are arrowheads, the small ones. They go back further in time, and they go to the ladle type points and spears, and all the way back to the far left there, they go to the paleo points and tools back then. That takes them back to the last glacier episode, and each stone was used to harvest a different type of form animals. So you go to Paleo Indians, they always refer to them. They had those mastodons of old, that picture where they showed all those Jesus-like individuals. Those are the stone tools they were using back then. Fast forward in time, and what this is doing is showing that the adaptation of our ancestors of changing our use of tools here to meet the day and age that we live in. And what was important about that is that it shows that how we had to adapt, through time, or we just ceased to exist. And the moment those stone tools went away, 1630s, right? That page stops right there, but it still should have continued on. It should have those black ball musket balls and modern rifles, and who knows in the future, right? Our children will have lightsabers. And that's that story of how archaeologists can, right? You can see a dated person who knows when it started.
I think he got into my hunting box and took a picture of my stone tools I still use.
So to stay on time here, I'll fast forward to this here. Here's a stone tool of example. Ancestrally from an area that we hold near and dear to our heart ancestrally, and what that's referred to as a Hickston quartzite. This was removed from the mine site in Hickston, Wisconsin, called Silver Mound, and this is something that's unique to our region. And you will find this all over the watershed of the Mississippi River, and up all the confluences and those watersheds that integral to it. You'll find this tool, this stone that we share. We take, and harvest it and take it all across, our areas. Our men of old used to love to travel some 12,000 years ago. That's a paleo point right there. That tool right there made 10 to 12,000 years ago is just as sharp as today. I have an ice cream bucket over there, and is just as sharp as today as it was when it was made. So it shows, that these tools are something that we can show that we use integrally, because you'll not only find that in the paleo point, you'll find that in the archaic points, you'll find those into the early woodland points, you'll find that in the proto-historic points. And oh, by the way, that, all those tools were made by our ancestors, the Ho-Chunk people from this region over here too. So that's something, another way of showing our integral ties of staying, living within our ancestral areas since time immemorial. And, but I mentioned, our glacier, our stories of way back, and today's society, they always talk about this glacier lake. You drive up I-90 between, Madison to Toma, and you go through this glacier lake area, a big castle rock that you can see by Camp, Douglas, through that area. That's the, physical evidence of this glacier lake right there. But we also talk about in our story another lake that was here temporarily. And Jim Funmaker told this story to us years ago, and he referred to it as Nukma Ruha Nifate. In short, what he's saying was that story talks about how the earth and the ice formed a dam for a short period of time on Nifate, and caused the water that was coming down the river to flow backwards up the Wisconsin River. And eventually it would settle down, and it caused a small lake to appear there. And our ancestors are sitting in the tops of these coulee regions and in the bluffs. Picture yourself, the Kickapoo Valley Reserve, sitting on those ridges, watching this lake, form in front of their eyes. And then only for it to break away and disappear and cause much of the deluging that took place back then. And a lot of your coulees and what you see, the Mississippi and the Wisconsin River today. Stemming from that, this glacier episode that took place on that map there, that water that began to cut underneath that ice that kept it back right there and work its way around Devil's Lake. And just imagine, our ancestors always living that period of time there and feeling that ground shake and rumble and all the noise that took place as that great environmental change was taking place right before their eyes. And so you hear many of our stories about the great water spirit coming down to Wisconsin and being so upset that, that all the other little water spirits were running away in fear, causing the tributaries and the confluence that we see today. And so those stories are real beautiful stories, and they can only be told a certain way. And so I'd see if I can fast forward to here. So this back in, I was working in our environmental resources, or in our lands division at least. And I don't know if it was Jim Rackey, but that's who I put on here. But there was somebody that came to our tribe and asking if we had knowledge of, anything about that could have anything to do with this lake that they feel that took place down there by Prairie du Chien area down from Mississippi. And whoever that was, they had come and met with our division manager, Richie Brown, and Dave Olson, and a few others, and Bill Kingsline, whoever it was in our division at the time. They didn't really, have that story, but it just so happened too that Jim Funmaker had come in, all worked up in a pithy about. He brought a snake in a little box, and this snake shouldn't even be here, just upset. And the birds are dying, and the environment's changed so fast, it shouldn't be changing in his generation. That's how fast it was changing. Well, long story short, it had come right about there that they went to traditional courts to ask for direction, but they talked to Jim Funmaker, and Jim Funmaker didn't want to tell them the story right away because he didn't want to give them a half truth. You know how it is, where our elders don't want to tell you something that they would have to recant later, or they'd have to change it because they didn't get the story quite right. So they always give it some thought. Well, he gave it some thought, and he come back and he told that story that I just relayed to you, Nuchma Ruha Nifade. And when he told that story, they were quite impressed with that. And they took that soil series and they looked at it, and they found out that it could only become a series of a soil series unique to its own, because it's a mixture of St. Croix, Minnesota, and the Mississippi River. well, silt and stuff that was falling off that glacier episode and coming down there. Getting to that lake that was temporary there and sedimenting out and settling down. Well, they were pretty impressed with that. So lo and behold, fast step forward, they placed this new soil series in the Richland County Soil Survey report. They named it UW-Madison Soil Series, based off one of our oral traditional stories of how that could have taken place. And I think at one point they had said that whoever was representing the NRCS and they said, no, the Ho Chunk's history is backing up our science. And Jim Funmaker was fast to correct that. And he said, no, now your science is beginning to back up our oral history, because our oral history has been here since time immemorial, been here for thousands of years. And he made a point of it. So this brings us real quickly, though, up to that 1634 mark that I mentioned, Gina Gallet stepping ashore, and you're not going to believe it, but that is not a photo. That is an image, artistry. That was a joke. And but that, in short, is Gina Gallet stepping ashore, and he met none other than my ancestors, John ancestors, and our ancestors here, the Ho Chunk people living on the shore, along the shorelines there, and Moguchuch. And at that time, they were looking for, this is the story goes, they're looking for a passage to the Orient, whatever it was, but they were anxious to come and meet with us, as we were anxious to meet with them. The reason being is we had already seen tribes coming from the east, along the bottom side of Lake Michigan and other places there that had things we didn't have. Well, we didn't have those guns, and we didn't have those metal pots. We didn't have that beadwork and those jewelries and such to give to our women and to our children. And we wanted that in part two. We were anxious to have that discussion take place there. And I heard one other person say, in those whole chunk of old, they've probably seen those people stepping ashore. They look back at that and they said, oh, there goes the neighborhood, right? And that could be the case, but we don't know. We didn't document that in oral history. So anyway, at the time they came, ashore in Green Bay in 1600s, there was 3 other tribes here: Menominee, the Ojibwe, Marvin was alive probably at that time then too, and the Ho Chunk people and some Sioux, living along the Mississippi. They weren't totally pushed out, from their ancestral areas in this area too. But real quickly, other tribes, as I mentioned, were coming around, the lake, and we were running into a lot of those tribes that were coming and meeting with us, in council at Daishi Shik. They're meeting us at Goose down there. They met us in Turkey, Turtle Creek, to a high degree. They still recognize us as a council area, because they don't just come into your area and live. They have to seek out council to have to safe passage, and so there was a lot of stuff you need to read in between the line in history. Those council cities that we had back then, it was there to meet with people that were either temporarily passing through or looking for safe refuge, for whatever was happening to the east. And so it became a very busy place in here. But our history often talks about us as being Ho Chunk people. We've never known ourselves to be anything different. And that bullet, on the bottom down there, the archaeologists always referred to us as periods of time. I mentioned the Paleo Indians, the archaic, Indians in the early woodland, and those are times. But they often recognize them separate than ours in today's reality, is that they try to separate our history from ourselves there, and won't call those Ho Chunk people because it doesn't sound scientific enough. But I'll fast forward here. We're going to get up to a point where we start talking about, after the French were pushed out by the British, and then the British eventually was pushed out by the early Americans. And after that whole onslaught took place, the only folks that were really left in this newfound, land of the Americans, right, was the native, tribes that were still here. And we talk about, the French, and I like this picture right here. That's another picture. Here's the French trading at Fort Howard, or Le Bay in Green Bay here. And this guy here looks pretty innocent. This guy here looks like he's a little more mysterious. Look at this snidey looking guy back here. He's got evil on his mind. This guy right here, he's that Jesuit priest. So they have all 4 things encompassed in this picture here of what the French's intent was here. not only did they want to come and trade, they also wanted to bring their religion with us. They wanted to bring change in our life. They wanted to, convert us from those savage mentalities. And I talk about, the British that comes later, same thing, the early Americans when they first got here. All of that process was in place there, and with, the objective is to strip us of our culture, strip us of our identity, strip us of our land, strip us of everything we had on here, because there's this ugly terminology out there that still is alive and well today, and it's called manifest destiny. The manifest destiny is nothing more than a God-given right to take what is ours. And that's all it is. And I say it's alive and well, if not stronger than ever today. And so we as a tribe, are a good example of how, we've been assimilated and beat up pretty badly. And we lost a lot of our culture, a lot of our heritage. But it doesn't mean that we can't regain it. I often say that as well too. So I put on after the dust clears, we're getting to the point where we're going to get up to today. And so the 1820s, the treaty eras began here. All the other bad influences were gone. They began to focus on the treaty processes. And I have a map here that shows after they took every acreage of land away from our tribe, or specifically for the Ho-Chunk people, that red area, that circle, that's our ancestral footprint, reduced our land base all the way down to the last acreage through treaties or land cessions, land grabs, and then our removals began. So I'll rub my mouse over the top of this is our ancestral footprint. They removed all of our acreage legally through treaty, and then they began the removal, which took us to Turkey River. And that was too close. We kept coming back. So then they locked and stopped the barrel, shipped us all the way up to Long Prairie, Minnesota. And you couldn't grow a stick of corn up there. And we fell back upon our traditional ways of life, built dugout canoes of old, and come back and hit out as aliens in our ancestral areas. And that didn't work. So they moved us down to Blue Earth. At that time, Minnesota in the 1860s, they had the Sioux Uprising. They made it illegal for any Native American to be in the state of Wisconsin. You could be shot on sight. So they shipped us all the way by keelboat down the Mississippi, all the way up to Missouri, and stuck us out to Crow Creek, South Dakota. And this is what we refer to as the removal period. Most tribes, including ours, also talks about these as being, the Trail of Tears, and we lost thousands of our ancestors on these Trail of Tears. So that's kind of brings us up to back in the early 1900s. Now I know Marvin Shirley was alive here. 1906 is when we were allowed to come back here legally in Wisconsin, establish allotments. We just talked to one of our legislators extensively about one of our leaders back then, Chief Yellow Thunder, how he blazed a trail in effect of becoming an American citizen there in order to survive here and acquire a 40-acre property, and that's established the process. 34, we realized that we weren't very organized as a group because we were scattered about on these allotments, and we decided to form our own tribal government to be recognized. And how we did it was based off those treaties. So we get to that process right on here of in the 1960s. We established ourselves as a tribal form of government. And so there we are. So we first recognized our tribal government by what was placed on these treaties as the Winnebago people. But then we, in 1994, we transformed into the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin. We have a preamble here that I think I'm going to hand the torch over here to John here, and he can talk more about on the government side of what we do for people today. So.
Well, as you can see, that short period of time isn't enough to collapse, 12,000 plus years of history. Every portion of that along the way is deeply interesting. But it's important to know that something Bill said early on is that we have had this fierce ability of adaptation, and we carried that with us not only through these periods of where we're battling the elements, but also through colonization and the removal period where we were stuck into areas that were not inhabitable by most people, forced to live out in the marshes and make life there. forced us to live under inclement conditions. Conditions right now that if they even reared their ugly head, we would call our government off and we all take a paid leave of absence because there's no way we could tolerate going to our heated cars for the day and coming in to sit in our cubicles while it snowed outside. So we have always really vested ourselves in our ability to adapt. So sharing this with you, I'm covering mainly the early development and construction of our government pursuant to our inherent sovereignty in order to form a more perfect government, secure our rights, advance the general welfare, safeguard our interests, sustain our culture, promote our traditions, and perpetuate our existence, and secure the natural and self-evident right to govern ourselves, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the Ho-Chunk Nation. This is a very historic and very real portion of our government to reflect on, all of our government leaders, because the things that we do have to be able to not only strengthen our sovereignty, but they have to do that over the course of time. And a lot of the Indigenous communities will recognize the 7th-generation teachings, things that are going to outlast you. And I don't know about me, but Bill's at the age where he's not really able to do anything for himself anymore. Everything he's doing is for his legacy, you know. So, but we have to think ahead. As members of the Deer Clan, we do have responsibilities. We are messengers for the upper clan, all the upper clans for announcements and for speaking, educating, but we also are advocates for our grandmother, our earth. So we are essentially what anthropologists will call the environmentalists of our people. We also are workers. We're workers for the workers if need be. So when we're asked to do something, we are to do as asked, and the things that we do return to our homes as blessings, and they take care of us as well. These are the roles and responsibilities we have within our clan and kinship system that have kept us alive for thousands of years. We aren't the people that we once were. That's absolutely true. We are a part of a modern society. As traditional as I'd like to feel and be, we don't have what they had a long time ago. As a matter of fact, today, our pop culture has us watching nationally or globally syndicated shows on survival, how to live 21 days out in the woods with no clothes on. And, you know, in 2 or 3 days, you got bug bites and dysentery and bloated stomach, and you're calling in for your rescue ships. Yet we're supposed to be the most sophisticated species on the planet, and we're not able to survive. But we are able to adapt in a lot of different ways. One of them, for the most part, is our political adaptation. We've actually become very efficient as a government and very unique. So going back to you know, some of the items that Bill shared, it's good to take a look at the perspective of where we sit in the footprint. If you're holding that rope and you stick your thumb on that rope, that, you know, for a lot of people, you know, that's their entire life. That space for those 7 feet that we have people in the United States, what is now the United States, or what was Turtle Island, that's only 7 feet of 50. We have civilizations, trail systems, stone tools, and the knowledge that came with that over the generations that didn't have interruption because they were embedded in our kinship, embedded in our songs, embedded in our language that is still alive today. So what little that we have been able to retain, we use, we honor, we try to do our best to reflect what our old ones have done. So we had a civilization, we had our medicines, we had our songs and stories, and we had an organizational structure. Something changed though along the way. A couple of things that were very, very significant and affected nearly all tribes. One, at least in the Midwest, was the removal portion, where we were actually not just removing, but we were doing our best as a developing government to exterminate the denizens of the forest. It wasn't very long that the removals were based on land ownership, and the fact that when the farmsteaders and homesteaders came, they didn't want the old residents, the Aboriginal residents, on their property, so they would negotiate deals, give them gifts to move away. They even had interpreters or trustees who would negotiate on their behalf, which are people that actually stopped talking to the families, the communities, the tribal communities, and actually just got the gifts and moved them out by force. They were basically signing small treaties. Over the course of time, our people didn't have anywhere to go on their own homelands, and were accused of encroaching the new citizens of what is now Wisconsin. So the U.S. Army got involved and began rallying us up wherever they could. Warfare existed. Retreats and advances were common. Not to mention, the inclement weather and disease that went through here. Our population was decimated for so much that that we weren't able to continue life as we knew it. In that time, we had to move. We had to separate to save ourselves. Our contiguous community, for the most part, from the Red Banks or Green Bay area, broke up into several areas across and even outside of the state line, into communities that are still very evident today. So we have roughly a dozen communities, from Green Bay to Nakusa to La Crosse, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, just a number of those. And we have a lot of communities that may not have the populations, but certainly are significant, like Neilsville and Melrose and some of the smaller towns where we had villages. So at that time, as Bill had mentioned, we did keep returning back to what is now Wisconsin, because the mantra of our people is, and always was, it would be better to die on our land than to live anywhere else. And that is the mantra that led our people to abandon that new place that they were relocated to and come back. And we had losses of many. It was said that, bodies would flow down the Mississippi for days on end and cover the banks and shores of our little tributaries, and even today, the vestiges of even surface level artifacts and what they call burials, but we were on surface of our ancestors remain. So the history isn't always macabre, and I think that's also important to remember, is that we are our history is not written by non-natives, by anthropologists, by professors. And they tend to write history about us as I want to say, struggling or surviving. We did survive, just as everyone else, but we also thrived. We created our own villages, our own communities. We had our own system of governance, and things turned on its head later on. So it's important to remember that wherever you go, whether you're a tribal leader or a student sitting in class, because someone is there waiting to teach you your history. The other portion of that is that when you go back and take a look at the Ho-Chunk Nation, how we began as a government back on March 19th of 1963, there is prehistory to that as well. And, a lot of times when I sat in class, I was always told, well, in 1934, the federal government passed the Indian Reorganization Act that recognized tribal sovereignty and gave them the ability to self-perpetuate and included elements of self-determination and self-governance. In reality, the facts don't support that. You'd have to actually envision 535 angry, white, obese guys trying to pass a law to empower the very people that they were trying to remove at that time. The history prior to that deals a lot with land, or the early precepts of what's called ILCA, or the Indian Land Consolidation Act. What had happened back then, and Chief Yellow Thunder, as he had mentioned, our first example of a tribal member, a member of a tribe that had became owner or deed to land that was given to us. Now, we were given land along the way. When they couldn't remove us, the federal government was placing us on properties and saying, you're welcome to stay here. This is your land. You can keep it as long as you wish. And they were unable to fish, farm, hunt. There wasn't enough land to survive. They ended up selling those land to early farmsteaders, or relocating themselves to other areas that were undesired by local homesteaders. and eventually some of the authorities that were developing it as our state began its early budding in 1848. Later on, in about 20, 30 years, the counties had started to develop their own system of governance as well. So all this time, our people are moving around. Now, in the context of today, we can move around, jump in our Land Rovers, scoot out to a different town, stop at Quick Trip. Back then, your survival, your basic needs of survival have always been food, water, and shelter. Your food supply is based on the resources that are around you. And if you're an agricultural society, you have to farm. There's no way you can develop a farm or a crop and find yourself having to leave it 3 to 4 times in a season just to survive. So we lost a lot of our old farm sheds that we had, some of our old Aboriginal seeds that we, and some of those species that we once had. And then we also had to find ourselves doing a lot more trade. So when the French did come and even the British, we actually had to utilize our abilities to create our own resources, our own economy to develop trade items. Once those trade items were engaged, we also lost the ability to create those, such as the clay pots that we once had, and such as the ability to make our own cordage and things like that. So as more European items start, less of the practices of preservation and harvesting and promotion, presentation have left us as well, which is why a lot of the things that we take a look at are from our past, but they're actually very foreign to us, like certain styles of finger weaving, how to process black ash, how to carve spoons, how to identify medicines out in the woods. A lot of that was lost simply to colonization that had come by and a means for survival, being able to raise a family without having the expansive ability to do that on the demographic. So as we came through, we found ourselves portioning out this land, and we actually lose the land that we were given. And eventually we found the state or the US federal government that found themselves with what they called the Indian problem. They could not remove us. As they did, sometimes in one series, they moved us out by rail car in the worst weather ever, probably colder than that day that we had in Madison in January 2016. But we would bury those who perished along the way. So along that way through Blue Earth, even all the way up to Omaha, Nebraska, where property was negotiated by the Omaha tribe to deliver to the federal government, placed into trust for our Winnebago relatives over there. So over in Winnebago are our Ho-Chunk people that were relocated over there. Same family, same kinship, songs, stories, everything. They're just relocated into a different spot and recognized as a completely different tribe. We did not organize as the federal government wanted us to it in 1934. The reason for that was because when the federal government gave land back to tribes, to communities, the land ended up having IIMs or individual owners for those lands. And eventually, over the course of 7 generations, a 20-acre property with 20 residents on it could have 88 residents down the line and be added to that. Your share of that property is getting smaller every year as the population grows. What the federal government had a problem with was if they wanted an easement on that road or to extract resources or to do anything, they had to get not acclamation, but at least half of those residents to agree to any type of stipulation. So in the event that there were hundreds of people that had heirship to a piece of property, the federal government was encumbered to find at least half of the owners to agree to some subset provision of that land. So eventually the government figured out, why don't we just give them one owner? Why don't we just give it to one owner and we'll just negotiate with that one owner? Unfortunately, tribes across the United States were not organized the same way the federal government was organized, or the young county governments and municipal governments were organized. So the federal government did embark on the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act, which was designed to actually develop a formal government system for each individual tribe, with the benefit of them recognizing the inherent sovereignty of the tribe, also allowing the Secretary of the Interior to take land federal land into trust, which was prior to this an act of Congress. It was a literal act of Congress to move land into trust. They began doing this for a couple of reasons. Number one, by placing it in a trust, the federal government still harbors the main ownership of that property. And number two, the tribes who were on that trust or given that were not able to sell the property, and non-tribals were unable to purchase the property. It has and still has a lot of stipulations. So when you see reservation land and trust land as overseen by that particular tribe, there are still stipulations that prohibit the tribe from doing certain things on that piece of property. So by placing land into trust, recognizing tribal sovereignty, many tribes started to organize under the 1934 IRA. And on June 22nd in 1935, sentinels from the federal government came to the Ho-Chunk people down in Toma at the Indian school, and they met at the gymnasium there. It was pretty hot and sweaty, kind of like this guy right next to me. But they negotiated with the idea and goal that the Ho-Chunk Nation or the Winnebagos at the time would agree to organize as a tribe, and the United States would help them with their constitution, as they have been. Some of the tribes and constitutions look very similar to the U.S. federal constitution, like the Ho-Chunk Nation. Others look more like a chartered corporation. Some are very unique, some are very specific to the tribe, some are very vague, but a lot of them were established so that this federal government could provide them some form of support. In 1935, at this meeting, the federal government officials were surprised that the Ho-Chunk people went into executive session. And so if you know what that means you get booted out of the room. In this case, we didn't boot them out of the room. They actually just switched over to speaking the Ho-Chunk language in its entirety. And they discussed the history of how land was lost. When the land turned over to the tribal people, the counties that were just forming began to tax those lands. Tax lawyers will call that a taxable moment. An exchange of property now becomes a taxable moment. So with that, the tribal people that would own a 20 to 40 acre parcel of land also now owe taxes, local taxes, to the county official. Still with the burden of a language barrier that they did not speak the same language, and therefore the counties continued to implore that they owed money for taxes, eventually going into default and then foreclosure, losing that property to the county. So they did not always sell that land. It was seized by counties in numbers, in thousands of acres across the state, where counties took advantage of the land that the federal government was giving to the tribal families and communities. So that was one of the major land losses that was taken there, that even to this day is on record that the county had illegally taken a lot of these smaller parcels. So with that 1935 discussion in the Ho-Chunk language, it was pretty evident that the history did not escape our Ho-Chunk people and our leaders at that time, who agreed at the end of this meeting to not organize under the 1934 IRA, because pretty much everything that came down from any official at that time did not end up in our favor. And so they held their ground, and for 39 years, as other tribes began to form, they just remained unorganized, as the federal government would consider that. In March of 1963, it was the culmination of a much larger effort to finally organize and seek federal recognition. And prior to this, the tribe was dealing with unemployment rates exceeding over 90%. They were working in cranberry bogs, or they were working in more of the marketing industry down in the Dells area, not just the Dells, but they would work to sell their crafts and their wares. So black ash baskets, beadwork, some silver work, any type of material work that they had attracted the attention of not only the local folks, where there were a lot of different cultural exchanges, but a lot of international folks. And I believe that Wisconsin Dells became Wisconsin Dells on the backs of the Ho-Chunk people that were there. It was unique to see people come out and share a culture that was not given with all the hundreds of tribes at that time that were organized. No other tribe had this ability to share as they did in the Dells, making commerce relatively new, which is why today I believe in this ability to adapt, that the nation has adapted quite well in business, in marketing, in customer service, and I stand by that. So go check out our casino if you don't believe me. Please do. No, big plug. But also, you know, as we began to organize the idea of being able to work directly with federal governments on grant opportunities that were to address the unemployment, alcohol and other addiction rates, smoking, domestic violence. The federal government was resourcing a lot of items to assist for our general health, welfare, and safety. So in 1963, after our general council met for the first time and passed our Wisconsin-Winnebago Business Committee Constitution, Miss Ada Deere, who was secretary of the BIA at that time, signed our Constitution, and that's what that little blue book is what we went on for many, many years until 1994, when we decided to not only renovate and remodel our Constitution, which is something that needed to happen for our growth. We also reclaimed the name that we have always considered ourselves, Ho-Chunk, our people of the sacred voice. With that, you know, from our first chairperson, Dr. Helen Minor Miller in 1963, and our new advancement in 1994, our first president, Ms. Joanne Jones. Our nation was led by our matriarchs, our brilliant matriarchs, and began its development. And we still are a growing government that has advanced not only just as a tribe, but also as a resource for our greater community, as an employer who has, you know, nearly 70% of our staff is non-tribal. Our gaming industry even has a higher percentage. We have become partners with a lot of local governments, local businesses. And even today, you know, we do a lot with providing a lot of education and support for not only our schools and colleges, universities, campuses, and local businesses, but we've also worked with our state legislature, as Bill had mentioned, on the Save the Mounds effort, where we went down south to meet our greatest leaders who had no idea that the mounds actually contained burial items or some of our ancestors, thinking that some of these effigies were just a mural of earthworks and art. So it took a while for us to step back in time and advance our education with all of our leaders, but we've done that the best we can. We've had to retell and turn the gears back on some of the things that people have been taught, to come back and learn a little bit about what we know and what we've been told. This Ice Age, you know, and this oral tradition carries with it that knowledge that would allow us to survive and thrive in an area where the Naked and Afraid fans are really watching with excitement to see the next person get bit by a snake, whereas we have all these guiding rules and things that we've been shared with. So we struggle to retain a lot of what we have left. But as we do, we are still fighting a war. We still have the disadvantage of our statistics on health, education, advancement, employment that our government was formed to address. Even to this day, I addressed the level of PFAS contaminants in the water in Brockway, where people can't even drink the water. And the first thing our response is, the colonizer response is, well, we should buy everyone filters and we should do this. No, we need to hold people accountable. If you're frac sand mining, if you're trying to do mineral extraction, if you're pumping crude halfway through our state, and if you're leaching a bunch of nitrates, phosphates into the ground and making it sure that we shouldn't even be able to drink our water, we need to engage our sovereignty. And so it's each of these days that we develop as our government. We look to the resources and friendships that we've made to ally, to stop the obstruction of mounds, to protect our earth as our clan responsibilities are. It's not the same as just going out there and standing in front. We've got to learn the laws. We have to know people's jobs better than they do. We have to understand the history and be able to give exact and concrete information, because right now there are people still out there digging through our burials, trying to create a story, and while we're standing 6 feet away from them and they're not asking us. So it's a part of the walkthrough to know a little bit about our history, so that we can determine our future. Without our history, there's no way that we're going to be able to find ourselves being able to survive. And I know, at least for Bill and myself and many like us, this is not going to end on our watch. We have littles yet that we need to empower and educate. And so this is why it's so important right now that they know who they are, where they came from, and they're cradled in their own life history and kinship, songs, stories, and language. So every day is a day of teaching, every day is a day of learning. And you know, we could probably spend the whole day, but I don't know, you probably only got 4 or 5 minutes left on your phone, huh?
Yeah, my watch.
Yeah. But I guess, you know, because it feels like we're talking to a wall, I'd love to hear some response or some questions that we may have. So we have a helper here.
First question, Matea.
Okay, so this is to Bill from Lake Core from Princeton, Illinois, says, hello. Oops. Okay.
Maybe that wasn't to me, Matea.
Yeah, okay, I'm just trying to find here. All right. So for Bill, why is it that you don't attribute the building of the mounds to the early Ho-Chunk people? No oral history of this. Was the driftless of northern Illinois shared by Paleo era people during the Ice Age? From Daniel or Briar Diet.
Yeah, so within the Ho-Chunk Nation's Heritage Preservation Department, we have instruction from 2 different sources. We have Heritage Preservation Board, gives us administratively our direction for day-to-day tasks generally. But then on more of a traditional cultural means, we refer to our traditional courts, which is part of our judicial system. The Ho-Chunk Nation has a luxury of having a traditional courts that is comprised of traditional clan leaders that sit and meet every Monday. Traditionally, they used to, and now they meet every other Monday. And they are an advisory group that we seek instruction and direction from when we don't know the answer. And through the period of the removals, for example, and we'll just use that for a short period of time, we have been largely stripped of our ability to remember our culture in many areas. One of them being is those in between the line things that we take for granted. When you see something in writing, for example, you can reference it, this is and that. And during the removal period, so they removed us no less than 4 different reservations. And what accompanied each move was those main little items of a library, a blacksmith shop, a mission, school, a church, the main directive that they were pushing us through was to erase the Indian, right, and create perfect little Americans. And in that process, they stripped us a lot of our knowledge and our culture that that many of our people have a hard time regaining now. One of those things that we had lost through time was the ability to talk about the direct connection to earthworks, and yet you'll still read articles in papers back in the 1850s, the early 1900s there, where you'll see Ho-Chunk being referred to as Winnebago at that time, coming forward and trying to protect earthworks. And matter of fact, stating Beloit, for example, when they were destroying a series of mounds down by Rockford, that there were several family members that came there to confront the individuals that were destroying the burials and removing all the remains of there, and they matter of factly stated that they needed to stop that. That they're removing our ancestors is how they stated that. But having little ability to have a say in the matter, they were ushered away by law enforcement and they continued to destroy the mountains. And so putting all this together and me not having the ability to formally state, I matter of factly, I am the direct relation of those ancestors in there. I have to rely on the fact that, you know, the ancestral way put into they were placed in our ancestral homelands. You living here present, no different than you living on a farm homestead for 100 years, you know what goes on that property. We would have had direct knowledge of either creating those directly ourselves and or being witness to them being placed here and allowing that to take place. And so not having physical evidence of somebody being dug up and somebody tattooed Winnebago across their forehead or skull on there, there just is not that evidence out there. And so I cannot clearly state that. But we sat there in the court of law at the state. We had Dennis Funmaker, who was the leader of our Bear Clan, sitting there, you know, in the court of law, stating that those SPG mounds and the earthworks around this area are directly linked to our history and our culture. And the preponderance evidence is there, but we cannot matter of factly state that those people that are buried at Winger Mound, the ones that were sitting across the court of law in there, that those are in fact my ancestors or that family's ancestors, nor do we know who directly turned over, you know, the dirt to make them. And so in short, we don't have the ability to claim that, so therefore we cannot claim it.
Yeah, and I think that that's a great thing to do, is not make any assumptions that we have going forward, and then, you know, because we were going to do the same thing, commit the same thing that a lot of the anthropologists do, but they'll sell that as fact, and misguided history it's hard to undo.
And how many times have you seen, you know, people matter of factly state, oh, I dug up over this or did this, or not, I'm just going to use that for that. We'll go and state something, then later have to recant it. This goes back to Jim Funmaker, not wanting to tell you a half truth.
Yeah.
You know, that you later have to come back and step back and I feel apologize to you for telling you something that was maybe not true.
I'm guessing there's probably more questions.
Yeah. And so that's the main reason why we don't do that. So
Thank you. We have a couple questions highlighted here. So one is, before Europeans arrived, did the Ho-Chunk have history of controlled burns to protect oak savannas?
oh yes, definitely. But not to the degree a lot of people lay credit, you know, to tribes going in there and just burning off state of Wisconsin.
Yep.
Now here's the reason being, those oak savannas place settings, they're a thing of the past. Although we like to go out there and try to recreate oak savannas, it's at great cost now. It's a very expensive hobby to do so. Our environment is not conducive to oak savanna type settings anymore. And yet those mounds that were placed here 2,000 years ago, that's the setting they were in. Because of several major critical things we no longer have. Fire plays a natural role in the process of taking care of these sites out there, but we weren't the ones starting it for the most part. You know, our mother, the earth, and the environment around us does that stuff. What did cause a lot of your oak savanna type settings, for example, was the passenger pigeon. One example of thousands of birds coming through an area and defoliaging this whole area here for weeks on end out here, months on end, only to leave, you know, and you took that away. You know, today's society took that away from us. You know, we don't have a passenger pigeon left on this earth out there, and it took away one of the critical components that kept those oak savannas in our region, unique from around the world. You know, it's all gone. And so we cannot do that anymore out there. We can recreate oak savannas, but it's like, again, it's at great cost. And fire plays a small role in our, you know, our history in taking care of our villages and taking care of, you know, our patches of blueberries and taking care of burning off the marshal that are so a great harvest of cranberries that take place. But it wasn't ever used to the high degree that you'll hear in modern day society. Oh, they burned off the state of Wisconsin out there annually. So, lightning rod, Quackenbush.
Thanks, Bill. Okay, so we also have a couple more. So what are some examples of the stipulations restricting use of trust lands?
Deforestation would be one of those. Anything that would mismanage any natural resources that are federally regulated, establishing property without a code, or whatever we can manage as a PL 280 tribe through our own sovereign authority, through statute or codes that pass are actually what's going to regulate any stipulations that exist. For example, the Mawa-Kanchung property, which comes as a federal code, having a limited use or restricted use for that would bar us from doing anything doing that. If we are in trust property, we can't just go ahead and open up a casino, even though it's ours and under full jurisdiction. We cannot go and open up our own enterprises without certain clarification. So we have claimed sovereignty, but it's actually quasi-sovereign. It is not our land. It is held in trust for us. So we are going to have a lot of limits for that. And it also creates confusion because if you live on trust property and you build a $250,000 house, do you own really, you have this really frustrated system where you don't own the land, but you own the value housing property. So there's a lot of confusion there, but there are also limits to what we can do.
Thank you, John. Okay, here's another one, is a brief history on the Ho-Chunk Nation, document in writing. Is there any official record?
Not per se, you know, we come from a real young government, you know, 60s on here, from a generation away from elders that said that we are oral traditional type tribe.
Mm-hmm.
I remember not a generation ago stating that, you know, it'd be hell or high water if our language had ever been put in writing. That if we were to not be able to learn it orally through traditional ways, then it would really cease to exist. We
do have a very detailed scroll of chronology of what took place dating back and key dates and things like that. You can say that tells the story, but actually the story of our people is really to be told by our families to us and our existence. Yeah, I remember sitting in traditional courts once again, believe it or not, and Donald Blackhawk talking to an individual sitting in a chair, and the elders were sitting around there, and he was asking about what makes Ho-Chunk tick. And he matter of factly stated, you know, he had a tungsten T5. I remember the electronic device even because he said it right out. This is a tungsten T5. I can break down all day long. And Donald said, you might as well put that, you know, electronic device away, because what I have to tell you, he says, is coming from myself. And then he said that it would take my lifetime to learn my one function as a clan member. He goes, and you have 11 clans sitting here today, he goes, and then it'd be 11 lifetimes of history that you'd have to hear about us. And there's no way that you would be able to write all of that down. And so that's why the tribe always refers to themselves as oral traditional tribes. It's more accurate history anyway. You know, I mean, tomorrow, all this electronic stuff can go away tomorrow. All the written material can go away, no different than in Germany in 45, they were trying to wipe off the Jews. They were burning everything of theirs that had anything written in the streets. And they were trying to wipe that person off the face of the earth. And once it's written, it's a guide for European folks to say what's right and what's wrong. And we had, you know, our old authors that had come through and did our whole histories, and now people are walking around with their books saying, "Oh, hey, that doesn't sound right." Yeah, they the writing, all writing. I have people that work within my own staff said, "Oh, that stuff there, they just caught, you know, just a little bit of the accurate history, but it's so bad you don't even want to use it because it's a accurate history." Yeah, you know, and there's people time and time again who like to write a small portion about your history. Oh, look at the time of day, and they didn't cover this thorough enough. And so the element of oral history is always been, you can tell a story. We can go see a movie. We can all go see a movie, and we can tell one person about that movie, each in our own way. None of those versions are wrong. It's just the way we saw it. And so a lot of time you'll hear in our tribal communities, this is what I heard. This is what they used to say. They'll kind of, that's their disclaimer. This, you won't hear us say, this is how it is.
I don't think we answered your question, but we'll try.
I think you did, you know, so it sounds like people just gotta ask more questions to the candidates and.
Well, can we have a moment of closing real quick? 6:30, and do we have just a few minutes? Because some of the stuff we do as a tribal government today that we've been instructed to do, you know, that preamble that John read. I'm surprised you can read.
Well,
Both eyes of yours.
I'm surprised Lisa didn't let you stay on a little bit longer.
I know.
Anytime you get more.
But we're instructed to do certain things as a tribal government for our people. A lot of people don't realize our tribe is just a conduit from, you know, our tribal traditional people, you know, to the American government. It's a piece of conduit in order for us to work together, right? At the end of the day, if this tribal government goes away, we're still going to be here as a people. And the reason being is that because our tribal government in the 60s established that in order to function in today's society, we should take advantage of some of those federal programs, a whole bunch of different things. Long story short, every department has their directive to do their certain specific thing. We focus on preservation. John comes from recently over from, you know, the health department, but we've been doing great things as a tribal government, you know, for not only our tribal people, but also our neighbors and our friends and those people I'd like to listen, because there's been, like I mentioned, we've changed and where we've been really focusing a lot on collaborative efforts out there. That's how we get along in life. And the educational outreach is something that it can only get better. And I have some photos up here on that PowerPoint presentation. I don't know if you can see the screen yet. But if you look, yeah, oh, he's gonna reach over here and do it. But on there is some photos I threw in on the end just to kind of illustrate. They say a photo is worth 1,000 words, and most of them have John in them. But what I'd like to show you is that some of the things that focusing on John's work in health over there, his educational outreach. Here he's standing there teaching. There's probably not a tribal member, you know, in that group, because there are very few, you know. I think it's from Dave Paul, which is really cool. Yeah, and he's showing food sovereignty, and there's such an interest and a tribal's interest in how to protect and preserve the environment, our interest in food and all of this, and not knowing that, and just a couple of decades ago they were trying to wipe us off the face of the earth, and yet our knowledge is so important in today's life. They still keep asking and asking and asking, and not only externally are we reaching out to collaborate, because we gain just as much information bringing it back to our people as we try to give out, but internally too, you see our tribal communities getting together to continue to practice those things that we still hold dear and dear to us that will get us through thick and thin. Now I could have put Pantea up here working on a hide up here, but I didn't have time to put it up there. But here's Clayton, you know, our traditional chief, and up there in Dells Dam area, and they're working hides, you know, and everybody said, well, they're not doing it the traditional way, you know, out there with a stick and, you know, out in the middle of the woods. But no, our elders never put themselves at a disadvantage if there was something new to try. Those stone tools that we adapted to, you know, I made a dugout canoe here several years ago, and I ended up using many modern tools. I know my elder would pick up a chainsaw the moment they come around too to do the same thing. That's good. If you want to talk a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, Indigenous food reclamation was a big part of this. And one day I heard this at a conference from a good friend, Winona LeDuc, who was citing someone else, who said that no tribe can claim sovereignty if it cannot feed its people. And we had a major education during the pandemic that our food supply chain was gone, and our people were getting sick, and you know, Bill was out there using corn cobs for toilet paper and everything. Things were a little rough, but it got to a point where I said, hey, we're gonna have to get some food. Bill and I just jumped in the truck in the nephew, and we went over to Winnebago. We dropped 2 buffalo.
Yeah,
and we drove them back here right on the flatbed trailer, and we fed our people. And it was, you know, and it was nice to have that level of sovereignty. You know, and going back to indigenous food, these are our inherent foods. It's the saving grace. It's what is going to help us with controlling diabetes, obesity, heart disease, a lot of ancillary conditions. And so not only are we reclaiming food, we're also training non-tribal professionals in education and dietetics to honor, respect our traditional foods, where they're actually fully participating in the harvest, preparation, presentation, preservation of all of these foods, and almost in a sense, reintroducing us to these foods, not just simply because they are healthier for us, but the means at which we do that contain the holiness or sacredness to it.
Can you play that video?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you guys who are hanging around after bar time here, I have a small little clip I'm happy to show you. One of the elements here that we have is a transition video of our dietetic staff.
Yes.
Hoke wahide aide shuno. Si reja, wako pene kateda, ikuroke hara magara gi nambojo hide. Eskege, nagura pinchina, anaga wako pene pina gere gido hachina. Najiro jane. Yahweh ha, Yahweh ha, Yahweh ha, Yahweh, Yahweh.
When we started with the indigenous foods, we really had to do a lot of learning, and we are still learning. Only in the last really few years have I come to understand how important corn is to Ho-Chunk people and to Native people in general. I mean, corn is life.
As far as the cultural side of things goes, I feel like I was not prepared at all. It's just not something that you can learn in school. So I definitely don't think that I was prepared at all for what I was getting into when I started working here.
Since our transition to more indigenous foods and food systems, I've had the privilege of learning a lot about a lot of different foods. Some exciting things were going wild ricing, so that was just a fabulous experience. We learned about looking for different teas out in the wild, and now I can find wintergreen anywhere. It's pretty fun.
I was very, very nervous to try to sit there and tell people how to change their diets without really understanding their culture. And I feel like I didn't have the right place to be sitting there doing that when I didn't understand the person themselves.
There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of history of loss, and you know, everyone's looking sometimes for their way and how to get their way back.
I think transitioning to a more indigenous-based food system really gives us more authentic understanding of where people are coming from. We have learned how to make sumac tea and wintergreen tea, which is pretty easy. So those are kind of nice. I've also been involved with processing an elk, and I know recently, I was not there, but they processed a bison and froze that as well, 2 of them, in fact. The squash, we have 2 years now. The winter squash, we have cut up and dried winter squash. So we actually have dried squash that we have actually made into a soup with some pheasant and some dried corn. And it was like the best soup ever.
Although I have learned a lot about indigenous foods, it's not always just about the food. Sure, that's important. We need food to survive, but it's definitely gaining the knowledge from that. And it's connecting not only with our earth, but also with all the other knowledge keepers that are out there. And it's also spreading that information too, because a lot of people want to learn about it, but it's just where do we find the information, and kind of refocusing.
I think a lot of times nowadays I am much more of a student because I just have so much more to learn about Indigenous foods. And then my background in education helped me to kind of take that new knowledge and apply it to my core principles of how do I put that into the form of providing education for other people.
So this is in its long form, an example of sovereignty in play. We run our nation. We oversee the health and wellness department. We oversee our community health department. We oversee our overall executive department of health, and we oversee our government leadership. That is the succession of our people running that, not the doctors, not the lawyers, not the marketers. If they are, they're us. And so I think it's a huge advancement, and now we see how we can actually engage and take leadership, take our health back, take our financial disposition back, take land back, take everything back that was once ours, and make that effort. So the story at the end of this discussion is a good story. It is a continuing forward progression of a story that hopefully something that we often think about is, did we make our ancestors proud? Did we do right by them? Are we continuing to do this, and are we leaving that fire inside of our next generation to continue that when we become those ancestors ourselves? So the story is always going to be written. It's always going to be shared, but it must be written and shared by us and our people. So this is why tonight was so exciting to be a part of the people that get to tell our own history from our own perspectives, be a part to share, and making sure that when we have opportunities like that, don't go sourcing out the first PhD, Brooklyn, New York, with their dissertation on life on the res, because it seems to be like we always go after the highest profile person out there with the most degrees to that aren't even from the communities and work there every day for their knowledge. Come to the people that are here every single day that are working with us. We're happy to share, and also happy to learn from everybody. So that was kind of my closing thought, but I'm gonna turn that, wrap it up with you, because I might have to leave by the time you get started.
Well, you can read my notes, so I can.
If anybody could read anything.
Yeah, that's it. I have a doctor's handwriting. I should have become a doctor, right? So, yeah, well, thank you, everybody, for that kind of sat through this. I still see Marvin on here. Must have fell asleep against his computer, but I'm over there too. So.
Got the mark where he had his first cigarette on that roll.
That's right. Yeah, so well, thank you once again. I know PowerPoints aren't the funnest thing to go through. What John was mentioning is that it's impossible to tell, the steep history that we have to be able to talk about us in a complete form here. And so what we try to do is touch, the tips of those icebergs of main areas and through our oral processes there. And every one of them that we talked about, you can do more thorough study on, or call and ask about, and call John Greendeer tomorrow if you need anything on that matter.
Or Bill.
He sits by that phone. I know
his number's in the bathroom at Quick Trip over in Toma. So
wow. I had to write it there so you remember. So yeah, so any questions, you definitely can email Matea, has our contact information. We're looking forward to do this now on a weekly basis, I'm guessing.
And in all reality, no jokes aside, that we could certainly chapter each element that was raised into an entire lecture.
Yeah, and we didn't even touch the historic periods alone. From even during the treaties to the removals to hub establishment. The story in its own self. Folks create hour-long presentations on the mission schools, and the industrial schools, and on how they were basically created, right, to change us into who we are today, and to a large degree they met that goal, and now we're fighting back to get all that stuff back. That's all we have for you for now. Any other questions that are critical? Like,
Are you closing this up, Matea, on your camera?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll switch it out.
you guys take care.
Hi again. I just wanted to.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm muted. Was I muted the whole time? Oh. Can you mute yours now? Okay, so I just wanted to thank John and Bill again, now that I'm unmuted, for taking time out of your busy schedules, because we all know you two are both extremely busy and you do a lot for our nation. And that idea you pitched sounds amazing. Let's do it. So, and also big thank you to the Ho-Chunk Nation Indigenous Arts and Sciences program and to UW-Madison's Earth Partnership for facilitating getting this whole lifelong learning community presentation set up. And, you know, we look forward to having y'all tune into more events that we have. So we'll have more information in a follow-up email. So look for that in your inbox. And like Bill said, if you have any questions that you'd like to get passed along, answered, you can go ahead and send those to me. My contact info is in the flyer. So feel free to look at that. And also we do have a Facebook page, so you can look up Ho-Chunk IAS and Ho-Chunk Indigenous Arts and Sciences and follow that for more events like this. All right. Thank you all so much for attending though. Hope you have a great rest of your evening.